Hey everybody, welcome back. We're doing another deep dive today, and we're going to be talking about loneliness.
Yeah.
And we've got this excerpt from an article called "The Dark Side of Loneliness No One Talks About."
Okay.
And I think it's going to be pretty interesting stuff, and hopefully it'll be something that you can use in your life to combat loneliness or help someone else who is struggling with it.
Yeah.
So the thing that really surprised me about this article is it really digs into these hidden impacts of loneliness.
Right.
They go way beyond, just feeling sad or isolated.
Absolutely.
So,
And I think that's one of the biggest things that I think most people don't realize is that there are these really serious consequences that can happen when you are chronically lonely.
yeah, it's not just a fleeting emotion like, oh, I feel lonely today.
Right.
It's something that actually can have some pretty long-term impacts on us.
Yeah, it's not just in your head.
Yeah.
Like it actually will start to affect you physically too.
Yeah, and that's what really kind of blew my mind
Mhm.
is this idea that loneliness can actually change the way our brains work.
Mhm.
So on a neurological level, what is actually happening when someone is chronically lonely?
So basically what happens is that it changes the activity patterns in your brain.
Okay.
And specifically, there are two areas that are particularly affected, and that's the amygdala, which is the part of your brain that processes emotion, and the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that handles things like decision-making and social behavior.
Ah,
So it's like your brain is kind of adapting to this state of isolation,
okay.
and as it does that, it actually makes it harder for you to connect with other people.
Oh, wow. So it's not just that we feel lonely, but our brains are actually starting to kind of expect and reinforce that feeling.
Exactly. And it creates this really vicious cycle.
Oh, yeah.
The more isolated we become, the more our brain starts to anticipate rejection.
Okay.
And so then that makes it even harder to break free from that loneliness because you're kind of already expecting people to reject you.
That's a little unsettling, I got to say.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit scary.
But it's good to know.
It is.
Because if we can be aware of it, then maybe we can start to combat it.
Absolutely.
So the article also reveals some surprising connections between loneliness and physical health problems.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research out there that shows that there are very strong links between chronic loneliness
Okay.
and an increased risk for things like cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, and a weakened immune system.
So it's almost like our bodies are physically reacting
Yeah,
to this sense of disconnection.
exactly.
It's not all just in our head.
Yeah, and the impact is actually pretty significant.
Okay.
There have even been some studies that have suggested that chronic loneliness carries the same health risks as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow. Okay. So that really puts things into perspective
It does.
because we all know smoking is bad for us
Yeah.
and we can kind of understand that on a physical level.
Mhm.
But to think that loneliness could have the same impact,
Yeah.
that's pretty profound. So we've talked about
Right.
what about how we cope with loneliness?
Yeah.
The article mentions some unhealthy ways that people try to deal with it.
Yeah, so a lot of times when people are faced with this chronic loneliness, what happens is they try to look for ways to cope with it, and they'll turn to these things that will provide temporary relief, but actually in the long run, they make the situation worse.
Okay, so what are some examples of that?
Some of the most common ones are overeating, substance use, excessive screen time, or workaholism.
I can see how those things could offer a temporary distraction,
Yeah.
but it sounds like they're really just putting a Band-Aid on a much bigger problem.
Right. It's like they're numbing themselves to
Yeah.
try to avoid those uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah.
But it doesn't actually address the root cause of the problem.
Right.
And in fact, it often creates new problems.
Yeah, it just leads to further isolation and
Yeah,
potentially, creates other issues in their life,
exactly.
both physical and mental.
Hmm.
And that kind of brings us to the mental health aspect, which the article really emphasizes.
Yeah. It seems like loneliness can significantly impact things like depression and anxiety.
Absolutely.
So how does that happen?
Loneliness makes you feel like you're worthless
Okay.
and undesirable.
All right.
And it can lead to this spiral of negative thoughts and emotions.
I could see how that would happen.
Yeah, and it can exacerbate any pre-existing mental health conditions
Right.
or even trigger new ones.
So it's not just feeling sad.
Right.
It's this deep sense of disconnect
Yeah.
that can really damage our mental well-being.
Yeah, and the worst part is that the loneliness actually makes it really hard to reach out for help.
Oh gosh, how so?
When you're suffering from chronic loneliness, you feel unworthy of connection.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to reach out to people.
Yeah, it's like you're stuck. It's a
Yeah.
vicious cycle.
It is.
It's like you need the connection to help
Right?
you feel better, but the loneliness is preventing you
Exactly.
from reaching out for that connection.
Exactly.
So it's like this catch-22.
That's so tough. So knowing all this about the dark side of loneliness, it can feel really overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any hope
There is absolutely
for
hope.
breaking free
Yeah.
from this cycle?
Loneliness can have some very serious consequences, but it's not a life sentence.
Oh, good.
The first step is acknowledging the problem
Okay.
and understanding that you're not alone.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What are some other things that people can do to combat loneliness?
Even small steps
You
can
can
make
do-
a big difference.
Okay.
Things like reaching out to a friend or family member,
Okay.
joining a club or group activity,
Yeah.
or just engaging in things that bring you joy.
Yeah.
All of those things can help to start chipping away at that feeling of isolation.
So it's about taking those little steps
Yes.
to rebuild those connections and rediscover the things
Exactly.
that make life feel meaningful.
And remember, loneliness thrives in silence.
Mhm.
Talking about it is one of the most powerful things you can do.
Yeah.
Whether that's with a friend, a therapist,
Mhm.
or even just acknowledging it to yourself.
Such a powerful message.
Yeah,
So we've explored some pretty heavy stuff today,
we have.
but it's crucial to remember that there is hope.
Yes.
Loneliness may feel very isolating,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not alone.
You're not.
And there is a path back to connection.
There is.
It might feel really daunting at first,
It might.
but taking that first step toward reconnection
Mm-hmm.
can really make a world of difference.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this.
Okay.
What's one small step that you can take today to combat loneliness in your life
Yeah.
or in the life of someone that you care about?
Mm-hmm.
It could be something as simple as sending a text,
Right.
making a phone call,
Yeah.
or just striking up a conversation with someone new.
Absolutely.
Every little bit helps.
It does.
And remember, there's always hope.
Always.